I'm something of an amateur classicist, and one of my favorite personalities from classical antiquity is Socrates, or at least the Socrates that has come down to us through Plato and Xenophon and Aristophanes. In other words, the Socrates that we know through the people who wrote about him. As of course, everyone knows, he didn't write anything down himself. My favorite story about Socrates, and sort of, in my opinion, the skeleton key that opens up his entire philosophy and allows us to figure out what exactly he thought or believed, is the famous one about the Delphic Oracle. The Delphic Oracle being the wise oracle who could commune between humanity and the god Apollo, the god of wisdom, where the oracle said that Socrates was the wisest of men. And Socrates was mystified by this, and he thought, because he said, I don't know anything. I don't know anything at all. How could I possibly be considered the wisest of men? Well, he finally concluded that he alone knew, at least, that he knew nothing, whereas everyone else thought that they knew everything, or the implication is, of course, that everyone else thought that they knew everything, or even knew something. Whereas he knew that he knew nothing, that the universe and everything in it, and everything in the mind and everything conscious was a mystery to him, and he knew it. He knew he was stumped. Knowing what you don't know, in other words, or at least my interpretation of that story, is the first step on the path to knowledge. Now, what has this got to do with creationism or debating creationists from a scientific point of view? I'm certainly not a creationist. I'm not a theist. I'm not an anythingist, really. But what I do sort of sometimes get confused by is people who put too much of an emphasis on science as an antidote for religion, or an antidote to philosophy, or an antidote to a number of things, metaphysical thinking, or whatever. The reason I say this is I don't believe that science is as exact a thing as people think that it is, or I'm having trouble believing that it is. I'm open to being corrected. But science makes a bunch of leaps of faith in and of itself, or perhaps at least assumptions in and of themselves, which an assumption is, to my mind, just another word for a leap of faith. For example, science deals in quantities or qualities like matter, space, time, velocity, consciousness. All these things, it assumes that these things exist in and of themselves, even as science also tells us that they do not, that they only exist in relation to themselves, in relation to each other, and in relation to everything else. Now, what exactly that is supposed to actually lead us to conclude is still, at least as far as I can see, unanswered. What are these things? Not what do they do. I know what space does. It enables us to make certain... It enables us to adapt to a certain way to what's around us, i.e., I don't really know what space is. It's infinite, but I know how to use a tape measure, and that allows me to make the furniture, which is kind of a hobby of mine. I know what time is because it keeps me from getting fired from my job, i.e., I don't show up late, I don't miss days at work or whatever. But I don't know what time is in and of itself. I use time, or I use the assumption of the existence of time to good effect in my my day-to-day life, but I don't ultimately know what time is, or whether or not it even exists in and of itself. That goes for just about anything. The basic building blocks of science are just assumptions. My understanding of the theory of relativity even admits this, that time and space and velocity and energy and all this kind of thing only exist as functions or derivatives of each other or of other things. In other words, they don't really exist at all. So, how can science be so sure of itself? I can see how one can be sure of it in a practical sense, i.e., if you do A, then B happens. Or if you want to understand A, if you use this method to understand A, you will understand how A operates, what A's attributes are, but you won't understand what A really is. So that really isn't that much of a handicap if one uses science in the terms that are usually set by its proponents. I.e., we've figured out how to split the atom, we've figured out how to do all kinds of things, feed the world, I suppose, or cure diseases, or whatever. But we know what the results of science are, but we don't know what actually ultimately is taking place when we do these things. We don't know what time and space are, even though we assume that they are, That's a little bit of doublethink, if you ask me. And it shows that science itself is a nuanced and even self-contradictory concept. I've yet to hear anyone explain this to me. Or perhaps it is explained and it's just going over my head, but it is something that I wonder about, and this is why I think that Socrates was right, or at least the Delphic Oracle was right when they said that Socrates was the wisest of men. He didn't know anything, but he knew that he knew nothing. I suppose it's arrogant of me to say so, but I like to put myself in exactly the same category. Maybe I think I'm the wisest of men as well, but how does that make me different from anyone else on YouTube? Thank you.